as introductions to the basic principle of the basic facts about the anatomy and the physiology of the nervous system. And most of it probably you have taken it in the third or second year, I don't know. Anyway, now, basically, in the brain, we have principally two varieties or two types of cells. The first one is the neuron, the basic cell of the nervous system, the neurons. And the second one, they call it the glial cells, or supporting cells. Now, for example, this is the neuron. This is the neuron. This is the body of the neurons, and this is the axons. And these are the glial cells, supporting cells. And there are varieties of glial cells. And each type of glial cell has specific functions. For example, we have the astrocytes, and we have the oligodendrocytes, and so on. So we start, this is the basic unit, the neuron. This is the body, the nucleus, and in that body, the electrical signal generated the action potential. Now all the messages in the nervous system is carried through a neurochemical signals. And these signals usually generated in the neuron and then transmitted in the axon. And that axon, like a cable, wire, is covered by the myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath, it is produced by the oligodendrocytes. Come to that later on. Okay, so we start with the astrocyte. So the astrocyte basically, it is a framework, and that framework has the following function. Number one, it supports the neuron. The neuron is suspended by the astrocytes. This is number one. The number two function, which is very important function, is the biochemical control of the environments around the neurons. This is number two. We'll see later on when we discuss the diseases and disorders of the nervous system, we find that any change in the neurons could lead to disorders of the nervous system. The third function, which is very important, is what we call the blood-brain barriers. Usually, the central nervous system is covered by what? By membranes, blood-brain barriers, to protect the nervous system from outside injuries, called blood-brain barriers. And it depends. For example, if you give certain medication, and that medication will affect the central nervous system, it depends whether it can pass the blood-brain barrier or not. Now, this is the astrocytes, and these are the fibers of the astrocytes, and it is holding the axon, supporting the axon. That's why it's for a framework to support the action. And it has a biochemical control and the blood-brain barriers. For example, we take the oligodendrocytes. The oligodendrocytes, this is the oligodendrocytes. Yep, the oligodendrocyte. The function of it to form the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath. So, the function of that cell, number one, is the formation and maintenance of the myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath, it is very important, it has a value in the transmission of the action potential. The action potential, which passes in the axon, the myelin sheath will accelerate the transmission of the signals. So we have a group of disorders called demyelinating diseases. For example, like multiple sclerosis. In that group of disorders, when there is demyelination and destruction of the myelin sheath, the transmissions of the signals will be impaired or blocked. So the oligodendrocyte, which is very important in the formation and maintenance of the myelin sheath. So as we said, the myelin sheath, it is very important in the transmissions of the neurological signal. Now the neuron itself, the basic nerve cell, it is the basic unit of the nervous system. And it has many characters. وهذا يجي على شكل بالامتحانات على شكل multiple choice. Number one character, it has unlimited connection, limitless connection. It has many, many connections. And number two, these neurons characterized by the what we call it the adaptability, they can adapt itself, and the variability, and could variable in its function. This is the second function. And of course, it has, as we said, several projections. The main one is the axon, through which the transmissions of the impulses, which is generated in the body of the neurons. Okay, how we organize the nervous system. You can imagine how the nervous system organized. And this is very important, because if you have any disorders of the nervous system, you would like to know where about in the nervous system. And that organization, we have the central nervous system, which is the cerebral cortex, and within the cerebral cortex, we have the thalamus, and below the cerebral cortex, we have the brainstem. And the brainstem is connected to the spinal cord. Also, in the central nervous system, we have two additional systems. One of this is the cerebellar or cerebellar system. For example, in the central nervous system, we have movement, and that movement should be coordinated, balanced. And that coordination is carried out by the cerebellum. So it has additional value, helper to the primary motor system. Also, we have the basal ganglia. And from the name basal ganglia, it is collections of ganglions at the base of the brain. And it has the function, it gives the characteristics of the movement. The movement is organized, smooth action. And the basal ganglia, probably tomorrow, will have separate lectures about what we call it movement disorders, which is related to the basal ganglia. So all the signals carried out in the central nervous system from the brain, brainstem, spinal cord, then go to the peripheral nervous system. And that is the root, nerve, and muscle. Root, nerve, and muscle. Okay. Now if we go to the CNS, central nervous system, we have the brain. Basic unit is the brain. And as you know from your anatomy, that the brain, we have the cerebral cortex. It has 4 lobes on each side. Left side, cerebral cortex, and right side, cerebral cortex. And each side has 4 lobes. And each lobe has a special function. And disorders at any area of these lobes will give us a special syndrome. We'll see later on. And these lobes, like for example, anteriorly we have the frontal, and posterior we have the occipital, then we have the parietal and temporal. And below that, below the cerebral cortex, we have the brain stem. And the brain stem composed of 3 parts. And that is the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. And beside that, in the central nervous system, we have the cerebellum, as we said. And then we have the spinal cord. So, this is the cerebral cortex. And these are the lobes of the cerebral cortex. The frontal, the occipital, the temporal, and the parietal. Temporal and parietal. And this is the cerebellum. And this is the brainstem. The brainstem. Midbrain, pons, and the medulla. Okay, so that is central. What about the peripheral or peripheral nervous system? We have the following. We have cranial nerve, 12 pairs of cranial nerves, which is considered to be a peripheral, and also spinal nerves. Spinal nerves, sensory and motor. And we have 31 pairs. And these are, we have at the cervical area, we have cervical spinal nerve, 8 pairs. At the thoracic spinal nerve, we have 12 pairs. And in the lumbar, 5, and the sacral, 5, and coccygeal, we have 1 pair. So total 31. We have another system in the nervous system, and that's the autonomic nervous system. All of you are familiar with that, which has very important function. And the autonomic nervous system, we have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The parasympathetic, called craniosacral. Craniosacral. Why called craniosacral? Because it runs with certain cranial nerve and with certain sacral nerve. So it runs with the cranial nerves, the 3rd, 7th, 9th, and 10th. And also it runs with the sacral nerve, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. That's why it's called craniosacral. We have the sympathetic, on the other hand, they call it the thoracolumbar, because it runs with the thoracic cranial nerve, with the thoracic spinal nerve and lumbar spinal nerve. So with the thoracic spinal nerve and the lumbar spinal nerve from T1, because we have the thoracic spinal nerve, we have 12 pairs. So it runs from T1, T2, T3, up T12, and then also with the lumbar, from 1 to 3. That's why it's called thoracolumbar. Beside, we have the sympathetic trunk and sympathetic ganglia. Okay, so this is a description of the anatomy. So we have now imagine how the nervous system is composed. Central, peripheral. Central, brain, brainstem, spinal cord. Peripheral, cranial nerves, spinal nerves. 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. So this is the organization of the anatomy, basic.